Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt like the night was watching you? The amber street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement as I walked through my neighborhood. My name is Victor Koval, 34, an insomniac with too many thoughts and too little peace. Most people in our small town of Ravensk knew me as the quiet guy who worked from home as a freelance translator. What they didn't know was how the nightmares had started 6 months ago after I witnessed a car accident on the highway. I hadn't been able to help them, a family of 3. I just stood there, frozen. Since then, sleep had become my enemy. Night walks were my only solace. Tonight was different though. The mid-October air carried an unusual chill, and as I passed the boundary that separated the residential area from the old industrial district, something caught my attention. A sound. It wasn't loud, barely perceptible, in fact. A soft vibration that seemed to emanate from somewhere between the abandoned textile factory and the derelict warehouse beyond it. Not quite mechanical, not quite human. I stopped walking. The sensible part of my brain urged me to turn around, to go home and make a cup of chamomile tea. But there was something compelling about that sound, like it was calling specifically to me. Just a quick look, I whispered to myself, my breath forming a small cloud in the cold air. The industrial zone had been abandoned for nearly 15 years after the region's economic collapse. Now it was a sprawl of decaying buildings with shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls. During the day, teenagers sometimes ventured here on dares. At night, no one came here. No one except me, apparently. As I ventured deeper into the forgotten district, the street lamps became scarcer, their light dimmer, as if reluctant to illuminate what lay ahead. The sound grew slightly louder, a rhythmic scraping that seemed to pause and then continue, pause and continue. SHHRRKK. 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 Was it the wind moving something metal against concrete? A broken pipe releasing steam? I pulled my phone from my pocket and activated the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness but somehow making the shadows even deeper. Hello? I called out, immediately regretting it. The word hung in the air, and for a moment, the scraping sound stopped. Then it started again, but different now. Faster. Deliberate. SHHRRKK, SHHRRKK, SHHRRKK. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. The rational explanation that it was just the wind or some animal began to fade as the sound seemed to respond to my voice. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The beam of my flashlight swept across the cracked pavement, illuminating discarded beer cans, old newspapers, a broken chair. Nothing unusual until the light caught something shiny on the ground ahead, fresh liquid glistening darkly against the concrete. I inched closer, bending down to examine it. The liquid was dark red, almost black in the harsh light of my phone. Blood. Fresh blood. My heart rate doubled instantly. This wasn't some ghost story or urban legend anymore. This was real danger. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. The scraping sound had stopped completely. The silence that replaced it was suffocating. Then I heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper coming from the darkness of the warehouse entrance to my right. Help me. It was a woman's voice, weak and trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call the police, to do anything but enter that building. But what if someone was truly injured? What if those seconds I wasted could mean life or death? "Where are you?" I called out, my voice shakier than I intended. "Inside, please." The voice responded, slightly louder now, but still faint, as if the person was struggling to speak. I took one step toward the warehouse entrance, then another. The doorway was a gaping black mouth in the concrete facade. As I approached, I noticed bloody handprints on the door frame, small, like a woman's. My flashlight beam trembled as I shone it into the warehouse. The interior was vast, filled with large rusty machinery and fallen ceiling panels. The concrete floor was covered with debris and puddles of stagnant water. "Hello?" I called again, my voice echoing off the walls. A soft sob answered me from somewhere deep inside. I stepped through the doorway, the darkness swallowing me whole. The scraping sound suddenly returned, much closer now, coming from directly behind me. I whirled around just as the heavy metal door slammed shut. And in the brief moment before it closed, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing there, hunched and misshapen, its face hidden in shadow, but its hands were impossibly long, fingers ending in what looked like metal tools rather than nails. The sound of the lock engaging echoed through the warehouse with terrible finality. I was trapped. My heart pounded against my ribs as I frantically tried the door, the metal cold beneath my sweating palms. Locked. Definitely locked. "Is anyone there?" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. No response from outside, but somewhere deeper in the warehouse, I heard movement, a slow dragging sound followed by a wet thump. I turned around slowly, my flashlight beam revealing cavernous darkness ahead. The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, with a ceiling that disappeared into blackness. Ancient machinery loomed like sleeping giants, textile looms, conveyor belts, and equipment I couldn't identify, all covered in decades of dust and rust. "Hello?" I heard someone calling for help, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was beginning to suspect this had been a trap all along. The air inside was different, heavy, with an acrid smell that reminded me of copper and something rotting. I covered my nose with my jacket sleeve and moved forward cautiously, each step echoing across the concrete floor. Drip, drip, drip. Water falling from the leaking roof, I told myself. Just water. But when my light swept across a large dark puddle spreading from behind a massive loom, I knew it wasn't water. "Oh God," I whispered, bile rising in my throat. The sobs came again, weaker this time, from somewhere to my left. I hesitated, torn between investigating the puddle and following the voice. My police officer father had always taught me, when in danger, find an exit first. I scanned the walls, searching for windows or another door. There, about 30 meters away, a small emergency exit sign glowed faintly red. I began making my way toward it, careful to step quietly. As I passed between two large machinery units, my foot kicked something that skittered across the floor with a metallic ring. I pointed my flashlight down. A pair of pliers. Stained dark. What the hell is happening here? I muttered, my mouth bone dry. The sobbing abruptly stopped. In its place came a new sound, a wet, gurgling chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then whispers began, multiple voices overlapping. "He's here. Another one. Fresh meat. Run, little mouse." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voices seemed to circle me, though I couldn't see anyone. My flashlight beam darted frantically around the space, catching nothing but dust motes and machinery. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite my terror. The scraping sound returned, but multiplied now, coming from at least 3 different directions. Metal against concrete, getting closer. I abandoned all pretense of bravery and sprinted toward the exit sign. As I ran, my flashlight beam bounced wildly, briefly illuminating shapes that seemed to move between the machinery. Hunched figures with elongated limbs. Gleaming metal where hands should be. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just fear playing tricks. The exit was only 15 meters away now. 10. 5. I reached it, hands fumbling for the push bar, when my flashlight caught something on the wall beside the door. Photos. Dozens of them, pinned haphazardly to the concrete. I stopped, unable to look away. Missing person posters. Some recent, some yellowed with age. All from our town and surrounding areas. Men and women of different ages, but all shared one trait. They were all loners, people whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed. People like me. My hands shook as I pushed against the exit bar. It didn't budge. I pushed harder, throwing my full weight against it. Nothing. It was either locked or blocked from the outside. The scraping sounds grew louder, closer. The shadows seemed to deepen around me, and the air became noticeably colder. I could see my breath now. A small red light blinked on in the corner of the warehouse, illuminating what appeared to be an old office area with glass windows. Through those windows, I could make out the silhouette of someone sitting in a chair, perfectly still. "Hello?" I called out, desperation overwhelming caution. "Please, can you help me?" The figure didn't move, but I heard a distinct click, followed by a crackle of static. Then a voice, distorted and metallic, came over what must have been an ancient PA system. "Subject 47 has entered the testing area. Commencing sound experiment number 23. The voice was clinical, detached. Before I could process what I'd heard, a high-pitched tone blasted through hidden speakers. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, not quite a screech, not quite a wail, but something in between that seemed to bypass my ears and drill directly into my brain. I dropped to my knees, clapping hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block the terrible sound. It reverberated through my skull, making my vision blur and stomach heave. Blood trickled from my nose, warm against my lips. "Interesting response," the mechanical voice noted dispassionately. "Subject shows typical hemorrhagic reaction to frequency pattern alpha." Through watering eyes, I saw movement all around me. The hunched figures were emerging from their hiding places, drawn by my distress. In the red emergency light, I could finally see them clearly. They had once been human. Their bodies were gaunt, skin gray and stretched tight over protruding bones. But their hands had been replaced with crude surgical tools, scalpels, drills, saws, fused directly to the flesh at their wrists. Their mouths were sewn partially shut, leaving only enough opening for them to emit those terrible whispers. "Stop!" I screamed over the noise, though I could barely hear my own voice. "Please stop!" The tone cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence. The voice spoke again. "Subject maintains cognitive function after exposure. Proceed to second phase." The figures paused in their approach, heads tilted as if receiving unheard instructions. Then they began to retreat, disappearing back into the shadows of the warehouse. I struggled to my feet, dizzy and disoriented. Blood continued to drip from my nose, and my ears felt wet too. Whatever that sound was, it had done something to me. My thoughts were sluggish, difficult to organize. The red light in the office went out, plunging that area back into darkness. I heard a door open and close, then footsteps moving unhurriedly across the warehouse floor, heading in my direction. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice raspy. "What is this place?" "This is where sound becomes truth," replied a calm, educated voice, no longer coming through the PA system but from just a few meters away. "Where we discover what exists in the spaces between frequencies." A flashlight beam hit my face, momentarily blinding me. When the light lowered, I could make out a tall figure wearing what appeared to be a white lab coat. His face was ordinary, glasses, neatly trimmed beard, receding hairline, the kind of face you'd forget immediately after seeing it. But his eyes were wrong. Too wide, too bright, pupils contracted to pinpoints despite the darkness. "Dr. Melnick," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Former acoustic researcher at Ravensk University. Current explorer of the void between vibrations." "You're experimenting on people," I said, the horrific realization dawning slowly through my adult brain. He smiled thinly. "People hear sounds every day. Music, voices, traffic, wind. But there are sounds humans aren't meant to hear. Frequencies that thin the membrane between dimensions. Tones that can reshape reality itself." He stepped closer, studying me with clinical interest. "Your bleeding response is promising. It means you're sensitive to the void frequencies." "The police will be looking for me," I lied, backing away. Dr. Melnick chuckled softly. "No one looks for the lonely night walker. No one notices when the insomniac fails to appear. We chose you carefully, Victor Koval." The fact that he knew my name sent a new wave of terror through me. How long had they been watching me? "You're insane," I whispered. "Insanity is a matter of perspective," he replied calmly. "From where I stand, I'm the only one who can hear the truth." He raised a small device in his hand, something that looked like a modified tuning fork attached to electronic components. "The second phase is more invasive," he explained conversationally. "We need to understand how the frequencies resonate within the cranial cavity. My assistants will help with the procedure." As if on cue, the modified humans began to emerge from the shadows again, surgical tools glinting in the beam of Dr. Melnick's flashlight. I backed away until I hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. "Please," I begged. "Don't do this." Dr. Melnick tilted his head, studying me as one might study an interesting insect. "Everyone begs. But afterward, when they hear the sounds of the void, they thank me. Right before they join my research team." He gestured to the approaching figures. After all, one needs steady hands to investigate the delicate architecture of sound. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a piece of broken machinery, a metal rod about half a meter long. I lunged for it, grabbing it just as the closest assistant reached for me with a hand that ended in a rusty scalpel. I swung the rod with all my strength, connecting with the figure's head. It made a hollow sound, like striking an empty drum, and the creature stumbled back. "Fascinating," Dr. Melnick noted, apparently unperturbed. "You still have fight in you." Most subjects are completely docile after the first exposure. I gripped the metal rod tighter, backing toward a narrow passage between two large machines. If I couldn't get out through the exits, maybe I could find somewhere to hide until I figured out another plan. You can't escape the sounds, Dr. Melnick called after me. They're already inside your head. Listen closely. Can you hear them whispering? And to my horror, I realized I could. A faint, rhythmic murmuring that seemed to originate from inside my own skull. Voices speaking words I almost understood, growing louder with each passing second. I stumbled deeper into the labyrinth of machinery, the metal rod clutched in my trembling hand. The whispers in my head grew louder with each step, an unintelligible chorus that seemed to echo from the walls of my skull. Follow, deeper, truth. The warehouse interior seemed to stretch impossibly far, much larger than it had appeared from outside. I navigated through narrow corridors formed by towering textile machines, their spindles and gears frozen in time. The air grew colder as I moved deeper, my breath coming in visible puffs. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Melnick's measured footsteps and the irregular scraping of his assistants. They weren't rushing, they moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. My flashlight beam weakened, the battery dying. I shook it frantically, gaining a few more minutes of dimming light. In the failing illumination, I noticed something strange about the walls. They seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. Just a hallucination, I muttered to myself. Whatever sound he used affected my perception. But when I reached out to touch the nearest wall, my fingers sank slightly into the surface. It felt organic, warm and slightly yielding, like flesh. I jerked my hand back with a gasp. When I shone my flashlight on the spot again, it looked like normal concrete. Had I imagined it? The whispers intensified, becoming more distinct. The walls have always been alive, Victor. They feed on vibrations, on screams. I pressed my hands against my ears. Shut up. You're not real. My voice echoed through the warehouse, and I immediately regretted shouting. In the momentary silence that followed, I heard something new, a humming sound coming from below. A deep, mechanical vibration that I could feel through the soles of my shoes. There was something beneath this floor. I swept my weakening flashlight beam across the ground, searching for a door, a hatch, anything that might lead downward. There, partially hidden beneath a fallen shelf, was what appeared to be a metal trapdoor. I moved toward it cautiously, aware that this could be exactly what Dr. Melnick wanted me to find. But I had no other options. The modified humans were closing in, and the main exits were blocked. The trapdoor was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength. I managed to lift it enough to see a narrow metal ladder descending into darkness. The humming sound grew louder, a rhythmic thrumming that made my teeth vibrate. Without hesitation, I lowered myself onto the ladder and began to climb down. Above me, the scraping sounds grew closer. I had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the trapdoor. The ladder descended at least 10 meters before my feet touched solid ground. I found myself in a narrow concrete tunnel, barely tall enough for me to stand upright. The humming was much louder here, and I could feel it resonating in my chest cavity. My dying flashlight revealed that the tunnel extended in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The walls here were undeniably strange, covered in a glistening substance that looked like black mucus. And embedded within this substance were ears. Human ears, dozens of them, growing directly from the walls like grotesque fungi. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But the scalpel that suddenly descended from the open trapdoor above, narrowly missing my shoulder, was definitely real. One of the modified humans had reached the opening and was trying to climb down after me. I had no choice. I picked a direction and ran, ducking to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. The tunnel curved gently to the right, sloping gradually downward. The humming grew louder with each step, until it filled my awareness completely. Behind me, I heard multiple sets of feet hit the tunnel floor. They were coming after me. I ran faster, ignoring the pain in my lungs and the way the tunnel walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with the humming. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died completely. I was running blind, one hand extended to feel the wall, the other still gripping the metal rod. The darkness was absolute, but strangely, I began to perceive shapes anyway, not with my eyes, but through the vibrations in the air. The humming sound was somehow mapping the space around me, allowing me to see through echolocation. The tunnel suddenly opened into a larger chamber, and what I perceived there made me stop dead in my tracks. In the center of the circular room stood an enormous machine, a complex arrangement of tuning forks, resonance chambers, and what appeared to be human organs suspended in glass containers. The organs pulsed and contracted in rhythm with the machine's humming. Surrounding this central apparatus were dozens of chairs, ordinary wooden chairs, arranged in concentric circles. And in these chairs sat figures, completely motionless. Not the modified humans with tool hands, but normal-looking people. Men and women of various ages, all facing the central machine with expressions of rapturous attention. None of them acknowledged my presence. None of them even blinked. They simply sat, listening to the machine's output with unwavering focus. I approached the nearest person, an elderly man wearing what might once have been a business suit, now tattered and stained. "Hello?" I whispered, waving a hand in front of his face. No response. His eyes were open but unseeing, pupils dilated to maximum width. A thin trickle of dry blood ran from each ear down to his collar. I moved to another, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20. Same vacant expression, same dilated pupils. But when I looked closer, I noticed something horrifying. There were small movements beneath her skin, especially around her temples and jaw. Something was moving inside her skull. "They've ascended," came Dr. Melnick's voice from behind me. "They can hear the void now." I whirled around. He stood at the chamber entrance, flanked by 4 of his modified assistants. In the strange acoustical vision provided by the machine's humming, I could see him clearly despite the darkness. He was smiling. "What have you done to them?" I demanded, raising my metal rod defensively. "I've freed them from the limitations of ordinary sound," he replied, spreading his hands. "Human hearing is so restricted, a narrow band of frequencies that reveals only the most superficial layer of reality. But with the right adjustments, the right modifications." He gestured to the machine. "One can hear the sounds that exist between dimensions." "They're catatonic," I said. "No," Dr. Melnick shook his head emphatically. "They're experiencing pure acoustic truth. Their bodies remain here, but their consciousness resonates with frequencies beyond our dimension." He stepped closer, his expression intense. "Don't you want to know what they're hearing, Victor? Don't you want to understand why I've dedicated my life to this research?" Despite my terror, I found myself curious. The whispers in my head had grown quieter in this chamber, replaced by the machine's humming, which was almost soothing now. "What are they hearing?" I asked, against my better judgment. Dr. Melnick's face lit up with fervent enthusiasm. "The voices of beings that exist in the frequencies between sound waves. Entities that have always been here, vibrating just beyond our perception. They speak wisdom that reshapes reality itself." He approached the central machine, caressing one of the glass containers with unsettling tenderness. Inside, what appeared to be a human heart contracted and expanded in unnatural rhythm. "This is merely the receiver," he explained. "Biological components resonate more effectively with the void frequencies than electronic ones. Each organ is tuned to a specific frequency range." I felt sick. "You harvested organs for this?" "My assistants helped," he said, gesturing to the modified humans. "They were my first test subjects. The procedure didn't go as planned. The cranial modifications affected their motor functions and speech. But they gained the ability to hear certain void frequencies naturally. They're quite devoted to the research now." As if to demonstrate, he made a gesture, and the 4 assistants immediately dropped to their knees, heads tilted as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "You're insane," I whispered, backing away. "No, I'm evolved," he corrected. "And soon, you will be too. I've been watching you for weeks, Victor. Your insomnia, your night walks, classic signs of someone who can already sense the void frequencies subconsciously. Your brain is primed for the procedure." He snapped his fingers, and the assistants rose and began to approach me, their 2 hands extended. I raised my metal rod, prepared to fight, when suddenly the machine's humming changed pitch, rising to a frequency that made my vision blur. The seated figures all turned their heads simultaneously, facing me. Their mouths opened in perfect unison, and from them came not individual voices, but a single synchronized utterance. "He is ready. Bring him to US." Even Dr. Melnick seemed taken aback. "This is unprecedented," he murmured. They'd never shown awareness of a new subject before. He studied me with renewed interest. "What makes you so special, I wonder?" I didn't wait to find out. While he was distracted, I lunged forward, swinging my metal rod at the nearest glass container in the machine. The glass shattered, releasing a flood of yellowish fluid and what appeared to be a human liver. The machine's humming faltered, became discordant. The seated figures began to twitch and convulse. Some screamed, a terrible sound that seemed to contain multiple voices layered on top of each other. "No!" Dr. Melnick shouted, rushing toward the damaged machine. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The frequency balance is critical." I didn't stop. I smashed another container, then another. With each one, the machine's output grew more chaotic, and the seated figures responded with increasing agitation. Some began to claw at their own faces, others fell from their chairs, bodies contorting unnaturally. The modified assistants seemed confused, their movements becoming erratic. 2 of them turned on each other, slashing with their tool hands. Dr. Melnick grabbed my arm. "Stop this immediately. You're causing dimensional bleed." I pulled away from him. "I'm ending this nightmare." I raised the rod to strike the central control panel, but before I could bring it down, a new sound filled the chamber, a deep, reverberating tone that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It wasn't coming from the machine. It was as if the air itself was vibrating with purpose. The seated figures went completely still. Dr. Melnick's eyes widened in what appeared to be recognition, then fear. "They're coming through," he whispered. "The resonance barrier is breaking down." The walls of the chamber began to ripple visibly, concrete flowing like liquid. And within these ripples, I could see faces. Inhuman faces with too many features, constantly shifting and reforming. Dr. Melnick backed away from the machine. "We need to restore the frequency balance," he said urgently. "Help me repair the containers." It's our only chance to reestablish the barrier. No, I said firmly. Whatever you've been doing here ends now. As if in response to my words, the deep tone changed, becoming a series of modulated vibrations that I somehow understood as language. Release. U.S. The seated figures all turned toward Dr. Melnick, their expressions suddenly unified in purpose. They rose from their chairs with jerky, puppet-like movements. No, please, Dr. Melnick cried out. I've served you faithfully. I've provided vessels. The figures advanced on him, their movements becoming smoother, more coordinated, as if they were being controlled by a single intelligence. Dr. Melnick turned to run, but the modified assistants blocked his path. For a moment, they seemed torn between obeying their master and something else, some new imperative coming through the chaotic frequencies. I used the distraction to make my escape, rushing back toward the tunnel entrance. Behind me, I heard Dr. Melnick scream, a sound that started as human fear but transformed mid-cry into something else entirely, a multi-tonal resonance that no human vocal cords could produce. I didn't look back. I ran through the tunnel, climbed the ladder, and emerged back into the warehouse. The whispers in my head had returned, but they were different now, urgent, almost pleading. Run, barrier failing, they come. The warehouse itself seemed different, the walls visibly pulsing now, the air thick with vibrations I could almost see. The missing person's photos by the exit door were changing, the faces in them stretching and distorting in silent screams. I reached the main entrance, expecting it to be locked, but the door swung open at my touch. Outside, the night was eerily still. No wind, no distant traffic sounds, not even the hum of streetlights. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. As I stepped out of the warehouse, I heard one final sound from deep within the building, a massive, reverberating crack that seemed to split reality itself. Then a pressure wave hit me, knocking me off my feet and into merciful unconsciousness. I awoke to the sterile beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of medical-grade disinfectant. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, a dull pain that seemed to radiate from the center of my skull outward. "He's awake," a female voice said somewhere to my left. I forced my eyes open. A nurse stood beside my bed, adjusting in 4-drip. Beyond her, through a window, I could see it was daytime, bright sunshine streaming through half-closed blinds. What happened? My voice came out as a rasp, my throat raw as if I'd been screaming. "You were found unconscious near the old industrial district," the nurse explained, her tone professional but kind. "A taxi driver spotted you on his early morning route. You've been out for about 16 hours. Memories flooded back, the warehouse, Dr. Melnick, the machine, those faces in the walls. I tried to sit up, but dizziness forced me back against the pillow. The warehouse, I managed to say. Did they check the warehouse?" The nurse frowned slightly. "The police were notified. They're waiting to speak with you." She pressed a button on the wall. "I'll let them know you're awake." While we waited, she helped me drink some water and check my vitals. The cool liquid soothed my throat, but I noticed my hands wouldn't stop trembling. When I raised one to my face, I saw dark bruises around my wrists, perfect circles, as if something had gripped me there. A middle-aged man in a police uniform entered, notebook in hand. He introduced himself as Inspector Petrov. "Mr. Koval," he began, "can you tell me what you were doing in the industrial district at 3 in the morning?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, the sounds that had lured me there, Dr. Melnick, the modified humans, the machine, the seated figures. As I spoke, I watched the inspector's expression shift from professional interest to skepticism and finally to concern. When I finished, he closed his notebook slowly. "Mr. Koval, we did search the warehouse you described. There was nothing there except some old machinery and evidence of squatters, empty bottles, food wrappers. No laboratory, no machine, no modify humans." "That's impossible," I insisted. "It was there. Everything was there." Inspector Petrov sighed. "The doctor mentioned you might be experiencing trauma-induced hallucinations. You had quite a nasty blow to the head." I didn't imagine it. My voice rose, and immediately pain shot through my temples. The inspector raised a placating hand. "We did find something interesting, though. That warehouse was owned by a Dr. Alexander Melnik until 15 years ago. He was a researcher at Ravensk University, specializing in acoustic engineering. He disappeared in 2010 after his funding was cut due to what the university called increasingly erratic research proposals. A cold sensation spread through my chest. That's him. That's who I met. Mr. Koval, Dr. Melnik would be in his 70s now, if he's still alive." I shook my head. The man I saw wasn't that old. 50s, maybe. The inspector studied me for a moment, then continued. "There's something else. We ran your name through our database. Your insomnia, your night walks, they've been noted by patrol officers several times over the past few months." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sleep deprivation can cause severe psychological effects, including hallucinations and paranoia." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at me again. How could I make him understand when everything sounded so impossible? And yet, the bruises on my wrists were real. The dried blood I could still feel crusted inside my nostrils was real. "Check for missing persons," I said finally. There were photos on the wall, dozens of them. People who disappeared over the years. Inspector Petrov made a note, though his expression remained skeptical. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, the doctor wants to keep you for observation for another 24 hours." After he left, I lay back, staring at the ceiling. Doubt began to creep in. Had it all been a hallucination? The product of insomnia and an overactive imagination? But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear them, faint whispers at the edge of my perception. And beneath those whispers, barely audible, the humming of the machine. 3 days later, I was released from the hospital with a prescription for sleeping pills and a referral to a psychiatrist. The official diagnosis was acute stress reaction with hallucinatory episodes secondary to severe sleep deprivation. I returned to my apartment to find everything exactly as I'd left it, coffee mug still on the counter, laptop still open on the desk. Normal. Ordinary. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt a growing sense of dread, as if I brought something back with me from that warehouse. That night, I placed the sleeping pill on my tongue, then spat it into the sink when no one was watching. I needed to stay alert. The whispers were still there, clearer now that I was alone in the quiet of my apartment. "Found you. Part of you, still with us." Resonance lingers. I tried to ignore them, turning on the television to drown them out with normal, human voices. The news played a story about unexplained electronic malfunctions throughout the city over the past few days. Devices turning on by themselves, radio stations picking up strange interference, cell phones playing back garbled audio. A chill ran down my spine as the reporter explained that the disturbances were most pronounced in the eastern part of town, the area closest to the industrial district. I muted the TV and pressed my ear against the wall of my apartment. There it was, almost imperceptible, but definitely real, the same rhythmic humming I'd heard in the underground chamber. It seemed to be traveling through the building's structure itself. Sleep was impossible. I paced my apartment until dawn, jumping at every sound, checking my reflection repeatedly to make sure I still looked human. The bruises on my wrists had darkened, and when I examined them under a bright light, I noticed a pattern within the bruising, tiny circular impressions like the suction cups of an octopus. By morning, I made a decision. I needed proof, concrete evidence that would convince Inspector Petrov to investigate further. I would return to the warehouse, but this time with a camera. The day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I purchased a high-quality digital camera with night vision capabilities, a powerful flashlight with fresh batteries, and, after some hesitation, a hunting knife from a sporting goods store. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone, but after what I'd seen of Dr. Melnick's assistants, I wanted some means of defense. I waited until after midnight before heading out. The streets were deserted, the night unusually quiet, no dogs barking, no distant traffic sounds. Even the street lamps seemed dimmer than usual, their light somehow absorbed by the thickening darkness. As I approached the industrial district, my phone began to malfunction, the screen flickering, apps opening and closing on their own. A text message appeared from an unknown number. Turn back. I switched the phone off and continued walking. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette black against the night sky. From the outside, it looked abandoned and ordinary, exactly as Inspector Petrov had described it. No lights, no signs of activity. I approached cautiously, camera recording, narrating softly as I went. This is the warehouse where I encountered Dr. Melnick and his experiments 3 nights ago. The police claim they found nothing unusual here, but I'm going to document everything I see. The main door was unlocked, just as it had been when I fled. It swung open with a creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. The interior was dark, but my flashlight revealed what appeared to be a normal abandoned warehouse, dusty floors, broken windows, rusty machinery. No blood. No modified humans. No trapdoor. Had I imagined it all? I moved deeper into the space, sweeping my flashlight methodically across every surface. I'm returning to where I found the trapdoor I narrated for the camera. It should be near the back, beneath a fallen shelf. But when I reached the spot, there was no trapdoor, just solid concrete floor, undisturbed for what appeared to be decades. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, kneeling to examine the floor more closely. My camera captured the moment my fingers brushed against the concrete and passed through it as if it were merely a projection. I gasped, jerking my hand back. The solid floor rippled like water where I had touched it, then settled back to apparent solidity. Did you see that? I whispered to the camera. The floor isn't real. Heart pounding, I reached out again, pressing my entire hand against the concrete. It sank through, meeting no resistance, disappearing up to my wrist. The surface felt neither cold nor warm, it felt like nothing at all. I pulled my hand back, half expecting it to be changed somehow, but it looked normal. Taking a deep breath, I positioned myself where I remembered the trapdoor being and stepped forward firmly. The concrete gave way beneath me like thin ice, and I plunged through, not falling onto the ladder I expected, but into what felt like thick liquid. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't orient myself in any direction. Then I was through, standing in a corridor that was both familiar and drastically different from what I remembered. The walls pulsed visibly now, the black mucus-like substance covering every surface. The embedded ears were gone, replaced by what appeared to be eyes, human eyes, blinking in unison, tracking my movement. My camera was still recording, though the display showed only static. The humming sound was much stronger here, not coming from any particular direction but seeming to emanate from the corridor itself. "This is real," I said shakily, panning the camera around. "This is what I experienced. The police couldn't find it because it's somehow hidden. Cloaked." I moved forward cautiously, following the corridor as it curved toward where the chamber had been. But instead of opening into the circular room with the machine, the corridor kept going, branching into multiple paths that twisted in ways that defied normal architecture, sharp angles, sudden drops, sections where I had to walk on the wall or ceiling as gravity seemed to reorient itself. "I think the dimensional barrier Dr. Melnick mentioned is breaking down further," I narrated, trying to keep my voice steady. "These spaces, they don't conform to normal physics." After what felt like hours of navigating the impossible corridors, I finally emerged into a vast open space, but it wasn't the chamber I remembered. It was much larger, and instead of chairs arranged around a central machine, the floor was covered with what appeared to be cocoons, translucent sacs containing human forms in various stages of transformation. Some still looked mostly human, though their limbs were elongated, joints bending in wrong directions. Others had partially merged with what looked like audio equipment, speakers growing from their abdomens, wires threaded through their skin, their ears expanded to impossible sizes. And at the center of it all stood not Dr. Melnick's machine, but a towering structure that resembled a massive tuning fork combined with organic components, pulsing tissues, flowing fluids, and what appeared to be hundreds of human vocal cords stretched taut between metal prongs. The structure vibrated continuously, generating the humming sound that I now realized was much more complex than I initially perceived. It contained words, concepts, emotions. I raised my camera, documenting everything, when a voice spoke directly behind me. "You came back. We knew you would." I spun around to find Dr. Melnick, or what had once been Dr. Melnick. His body appeared normal from the neck down, still wearing the same lab coat. But his head had changed dramatically. His skull had expanded, become translucent, revealing a brain that pulsed with light in rhythm with the structure's vibrations. Where his ears had been were now complex spiral structures that continuously unfurled and refold. "What happened to you?" I whispered. His mouth formed a smile, though his eyes remained fixed and unblinking. "Evolution. The entities recognized my devotion. They've been reshaping me to better perceive their reality." "The entities from where? Where are they?" "They've always existed in the spaces between sound waves," he explained, his voice now layered with harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. "In the silence between words, in the pause between heartbeats. Humanity has sensed them for millennia. That's why silence makes people uncomfortable. You can feel them waiting there, listening." He gestured to the cocoons. "These are the worthy ones. Those whose brains could withstand the initial frequencies. They're being prepared for the convergence." "What convergence?" I asked, continuing to record despite my growing horror. "The merging of vibrational realities," Dr. Melnick said, as if it were obvious. "Sound is merely vibration. Reality is merely vibration at different frequencies. When the barriers between these frequencies dissolve completely, we will exist in all states simultaneously." The cocoons pulsed in unison, and I noticed with growing dread that they were gradually synchronizing with my own heartbeat. "You're still connected to us, Victor," Dr. Melnick observed. "The frequencies altered your brain during your first visit. That's why you could find this place again when the police could not. I backed away. I came for evidence, to prove I wasn't hallucinating. Dr. Melnick's expression became almost pitying. Evidence? For whom? Do you truly believe anyone will see what's on that camera? They'll see only what their limited perception allows, an empty warehouse, perhaps a disturbed man talking to himself. You don't know that, I insisted, though doubt crept into my mind. If this place existed somehow between dimensions, between frequencies as Dr. Melnick claimed, would ordinary technology even capture it? I know because I tried the same thing years ago, before I understood, he said. Records, photographs, audio recordings, all useless. The entities exist in frequencies that technology cannot detect. He stepped closer, and I noticed his feet didn't quite touch the ground. He hovered several centimeters above it, as if gravity affected him differently. But you, Victor, you can perceive them now. Your brain has been attuned. That's why you hear the whispers. That's why you found your way back. You belong here, with us. No, I said firmly, continuing to back away. I don't want any part of this. Dr. Melnick tilted his head at an impossible angle. What? You misunderstand. It's not about what. The frequencies are already inside you, resonating, reshaping your neural pathways. Haven't you noticed the changes? I thought of the whispers that hadn't stopped since that first night, the way I could somehow see in the dark corridors, the strange bruises on my wrists. I'm still me, I insisted. I'm still human. For now, he agreed. The process is gradual for most, but it accelerates with proximity to the source. He gestured to the massive tuning fork structure. Every minute you spend here, the frequencies penetrate deeper. I raised the camera higher, as if it could somehow protect me. I'm leaving. I have what I came for. Dr. Melnick made no move to stop me. You can leave the space, Victor, but you cannot leave the frequencies. They're part of you now, and they will call you back. I turned and ran, navigating the twisted corridors with a certainty that terrified me, as if some part of me knew this impossible architecture intimately. Behind me, I heard not pursuit but the rising intensity of the humming, growing to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate the very fabric of reality. When I burst through the warehouse floor back into the normal world, everything seemed flat, dull, somehow less real than what I just experienced. The night was silent again, but it was the silence of absence rather than peace. I checked my camera with trembling hands. The display showed only static where there should have been footage. I rewound, played, fast-forwarded, nothing but gray snow and white noise. All my evidence gone. Or had there never been anything to record in the first place? I stumbled home in a daze, the whispers now a constant chorus in my mind, no longer at the edge of perception but clear and insistent. By the time I reached my apartment building, I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. The other tenants couldn't seem to see me. A neighbor passed me in the hallway, looking straight through me as if I weren't there. Inside my apartment, I rushed to the bathroom mirror, needing reassurance that I still existed physically. My reflection stared back, but something was wrong. When I moved, my reflection followed a split second too late. And around my head, visible only from certain angles, was a faint aura of distorted air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. I was changing, just as Dr. Melnick had said. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block out the whispers, but they only grew louder. Almost ready. Soon join us. The void awaits. Sleep claimed me eventually, my body collapsing from exhaustion on the bathroom floor. But even in sleep, I wasn't free. In my dreams, I walked through endless corridors of pulsing walls, following the humming sound to its source, each step bringing me closer to some terrible revelation. When I awoke, sunlight streamed through the bathroom window, normal, ordinary sunlight. For a blessed moment, I felt relief. Then I noticed the bathroom mirror. My reflection was gone. Inspector Petrov stared at the digital recorder on his desk, expression unreadable. The device had been found in Victor Koval's empty apartment 3 days after his second disappearance. The building manager had entered to investigate complaints about strange noises coming from the unit at all hours. "Play it again," Petrov instructed his assistant. The recording began with static, then Victor's voice emerged, strained and desperate. "This is my final testimony. I don't know if anyone will hear this, or if these sounds will even register on normal recording equipment, but I have to try. It's been 6 days since I returned from the warehouse the second time. The changes are accelerating. This morning, I noticed my fingertips have become translucent. I can see the bones beneath the skin, but they're changing too, elongating, developing additional joints. The whispers never stop now. They're teaching me things, how sound shapes reality, how frequencies can fold space and time. I understand why Dr. Melnick became obsessed. The knowledge is intoxicating, but I'm fighting it. I still want to be human. I still want to warn others. The entities, the ones that exist in the spaces between sound waves, they're planning something. A convergence, Dr. Melnick called it. I think it's some kind of invasion, but not like in the movies. They don't want to destroy us. They want to retune us. Change our vibrational frequency to match theirs. I've been researching Dr. Melnick's work at the university library. Before his disappearance, he published several papers on what he called consciousness resonance, the theory that human awareness is actually a form of wave function that can be modulated by specific sound frequencies. His research was dismissed as pseudoscience, but what if he was right? What if consciousness itself is just another form of vibration? I've tried going to the police station twice more, but no one can see me now. I walk right past the desk sergeant, and his eyes slide over me like I'm not there. I think I'm vibrating at a different frequency than normal reality. Last night, I saw others like me, half-changed people walking the streets, invisible to normal humans. Some looked terrified. Others seemed rapturous, as if embracing the transformation. We could see each other, acknowledge each other with nods or frightened glances. There are more of us every night. I've been monitoring the news. Those electronic malfunctions throughout the city? They're spreading. Televisions turning onto static at 3 a.m. car radios picking up voices speaking backwards. Children's toys activating without batteries. It's beginning, the thinning of the barrier between frequencies. I've tried to stay away from the warehouse, but the pull is becoming irresistible. The entities want me there for the convergence. All of us, all the changed ones, are being drawn back. Tonight, I think I'll have to go. I don't have the strength to resist anymore. But before I do, I need someone to know what's happening. If you're hearing this, if this recording somehow maintains coherence in normal space, please understand, this is real. The threat is real. And it's spreading through sound itself. Inspector Petrov, if by some chance this reaches you, I wasn't hallucinating. The warehouse at 117 Industrialna Street isn't what it appears to be. It's a threshold between vibrational states of reality. There's one more thing. I discovered why I was chosen, why my brain was so receptive to the frequencies. As a child, I had a rare inner ear surgery, titanium stapes prosthesis to correct congenital hearing loss. The metal acts as a receiver for the void frequencies. Check the medical records of the missing persons. I bet many of them had similar procedures or implants, anything metal in the skull that could serve as an antenna. I have to go now. The humming is getting louder. I can feel the floor of my apartment becoming insubstantial beneath my feet. Reality is thinning. If you want to stop this, you need to. The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of static, then a sequence of sounds that made Petrov's skin crawl. Not quite voices, not quite music, but something in between that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his skull. He switched off the recorder hastily. 9 people have gone missing in the past 2 weeks, his assistant noted, checking her tablet. All from the Eastern District, all exhibiting strange behavior before disappearing. Insomnia, complaints about hearing voices or sounds, withdrawal from social contact. Petrov rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. And the medical records? Still waiting on complete files, but preliminary checks show that 3 of the 9 had some form of auditory implant or reconstructive ear surgery. Petrov stood, grabbing his coat. I want a team at that warehouse within the hour. Full protective gear, audio dampening headphones for everyone. No one enters alone, no one removes their headphones for any reason. You believe his story? His assistant asked, surprise evident in her voice. Petrov hesitated. I believe something is happening that we don't understand. And until we do understand it, we take every precaution. He didn't tell her about the whispers he'd begun hearing the morning after first listening to the recording. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Nor did he mention the strange dreams he had of corridors that bent in impossible ways, of walls embedded with eyes, of a humming sound that promised knowledge beyond human comprehension. The tactical team assembled outside the warehouse at dusk, equipped with night vision, audio dampening headphones, and body cameras. Petrov led them, trying to ignore the whispers that had grown steadily louder throughout the day. Stay together, maintain visual contact at all times, he instructed. If anyone experiences equipment malfunctions or unusual sensations, signal immediately and we retreat. They approached the main entrance cautiously. From the outside, the building appeared thoroughly ordinary, dilapidated, abandoned, unthreatening. Petrov noticed nothing unusual until he placed his hand on the door. It felt wrong. Not cold or warm, but somehow both and neither simultaneously. And there was a subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, that traveled up his arm and seemed to resonate with something in his skull. He pushed the door open, revealing darkness beyond. The team's flashlights activated in unison, beams cutting through the gloom to reveal what appeared to be a normal abandoned warehouse, dusty floors, broken machinery, graffiti-covered walls. But as Petrov stepped over the threshold, he felt a momentary disorientation, as if gravity had shifted slightly. The air inside tasted metallic, and despite his protected headphones, he could hear the humming, a complex tone that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. Do you hear that? He asked his team. They shook their heads, expressions confused behind their tactical visors. Petrov moved deeper into the warehouse, the team following closely. Their flashlight beams revealed nothing unusual, nothing to suggest the horrors Victor had described. But Petrov couldn't shake the feeling that they were seeing only what they expected to see, what their brains could process, rather than what was actually there. He remembered something from the recording. They'll see only what their limited perception allows. He removed his headphones. Immediately, the world changed. The warehouse dissolved around him, revealing a vast cathedral-like space with walls that pulsed with organic life. The ceiling soared impossibly high, composed of what appeared to be interlocking sound waves made visible, rippling patterns of light and dark that shifted continuously. And the sound, the humming, was now a complete symphonic experience, complex harmonies and counterpoints flowing through him, carrying meaning beyond language. In the center of this impossible space stood the structure Victor had described, a massive tuning fork combined with organic components, vibrating with power. But it had grown, evolved. Now it resembled a towering tree made of oscillating energy, its branches extending throughout the space, connecting to hundreds, no, thousands, of human figures. They stood in concentric circles around the structure, bodies in various stages of transformation. Some still looked mostly human, while others had evolved into forms that defied description, bodies elongated and reconfigured around sound-conducting geometries, heads expanded to house larger, more complex auditory processing systems. Among them, Petrov recognized faces from the missing persons reports, including Victor Koval. Victor's body had changed dramatically, his arms had elongated, fingers multiplying into tuning fork-like appendages. His ribcage had expanded and reconfigured into what appeared to be a resonance chamber. His eyes were gone, replaced by spiraling organs that seemed designed to perceive vibrational patterns rather than light. Yet when Victor turned toward Petrov, there was still recognition there, still something human in his demeanor. "Inspector," Victor said, his voice layered with harmonics that seemed to bypass Petrov's ears entirely and resonate directly in his mind. "You found my recording. What is happening here?" Petrov demanded, noticing with horror that his team remained frozen at the entrance, still seeing only an empty warehouse. "The convergence has begun," Victor explained. "The frequencies are aligning. Soon, the barrier between vibrational states of reality will dissolve completely. And then what? Then everything changes. Consciousness itself is redefined. Humanity evolves beyond physical limitation, beyond language, beyond individual identity. We become pure resonance." Petrov backed away. "This isn't evolution. This is invasion." Victor tilted his head, the movement unnaturally fluid. "Perhaps. From a certain perspective. But the entities have always been here, Petrov. In the silence between heartbeats. In the space between words. Waiting for us to hear them. And if we don't want to hear?" Petrov asked, his hand moving to his sidearm. "What is irrelevant to frequency?" came another voice, Dr. Melnick, now barely recognizable as human. His body had become a complex arrangement of organic audio equipment, his head a massive receptor array. The wave function continues regardless of particle preference. Around them, the transformed humans began to sway in unison, generating a harmonic counterpoint to the central structure's humming. The sound grew in intensity, and Petrov felt something changing within his own skull, a pressure, a realignment, as if his brain were being retuned. With tremendous effort, he raised his gun, not at Victor or Melnick, but at the central structure. "If I destroy that, does it stop?" Victor's expression became almost pitying. "You can't destroy frequency with bullets, Inspector. Sound isn't something you can shoot. But the machine isn't a machine anymore," Victor finished. "It's a frequency translator. And it exists simultaneously in multiple vibrational states now. Destroy this physical manifestation, and it continues in the others. The humming intensified. Petrov felt his perception expanding, his consciousness stretching. He could suddenly hear everything: conversations across the city, heartbeats of people miles away, the subtle vibration of cellular division within his own body. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and terrifying. With the last of his human will, he raised the headphones back to his ears and slammed them on. Instantly, the cathedral space vanished, replaced by the ordinary warehouse. His team stood nearby, watching him with concern. "Sir," his lieutenant questioned, "are you all right?" Petrov stared at the space where he'd seen Victor and the others. Now there was nothing, just dust and shadows. But he knew they were still there, vibrating at a frequency his dampened perception could no longer detect. "We're leaving," he ordered. "Now." Outside, the night seemed unnaturally quiet. Even the usual city sounds, distant traffic, wind in the trees, stray dogs barking, were absent. As if the entire world were holding its breath. "Set up a perimeter," Petrov instructed. "No one enters this building. I need to make some calls." But as his team moved to comply, Petrov noticed something that chilled him to the core. The streetlights along Industrialna Street were flickering in a distinct pattern, not random power fluctuations, but a deliberate rhythm. Morse code. He watched, translating automatically. "We are everywhere." His phone vibrated in his pocket. When he checked it, the screen showed no caller ID, just an audio waveform pulsing across the display. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Petrov," he said. A voice responded, not Victor's or Melnik's, but something older, deeper, composed of multiple tones layered together. "The frequency shift cannot be stopped, Inspector. It has already propagated too far. Through electronic devices, through radio waves, through the very air molecules vibrating with sound." Petrov glanced at his team, but they showed no sign of hearing the voice or noticing anything unusual about his call. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "One is a limited concept. We exist. Existence resonates. Resonance spreads. You're changing people against their will. Change is inevitable. We merely alter the frequency." The call ended abruptly. Petrov stared at his phone, noticing for the first time a subtle vibration coming from the device, not the normal mechanical vibration of its components, but something deeper, as if the very molecules were oscillating in an unnatural pattern. He dropped the phone, watching it shatter on the pavement. But even broken, the pieces continued to vibrate slightly. His lieutenant approached. "Sir?" "The perimeter is established. What are our next steps?" Petrov hesitated. What could he possibly do against an invasion that traveled through sound itself? "How do you fight frequency?" "Give me the university's acoustic engineering department," he said finally. "And check if anyone there remembers Dr. Melnik's research. There has to be a way to disrupt these frequencies." As his team scrambled to comply, Petrov removed his headphones momentarily, listening. The whispers were louder now, more distinct. And beneath them, barely perceptible, the humming continued to grow in complexity and power. He replaced the headphones quickly, but not before recognizing a pattern in the sound, a pattern that matched his own heartbeat perfectly, as if the frequency was already synchronizing with his body's natural rhythm. The convergence had begun, just as Victor had warned. Reality itself was being retuned. And somewhere in the spaces between sound waves, in the silence between words, in the pause between heartbeats, the entities were listening. Waiting. For all of us to hear them. 3 weeks later, a junior officer found Inspector Petrov's badge and service weapon abandoned on his desk. His final report lay beside them, a detailed account of the investigation into the disappearances connected to the warehouse on Industrialna Street. The report ended mid-sentence. After extensive consultation with acoustic engineering experts, we determined that the frequency patterns originating from the warehouse location are expanding at an exponential rate. Attempts to neutralize them with counter-frequencies have proven ineffective. The latest measurements indicate that the affected area now encompasses approximately 40% of the city, with expansion continuing despite containment efforts. Subject interviews reveal increasing reports of auditory phenomena, particularly during periods of silence. Recommended action is immediate evacuation of the Eastern District and implementation of Protocol Omega 9 for potential reality-altering phenomena. The following frequencies should be avoided at all costs: 19.47 Hz, 133.92 Hz, and the composite wave pattern attached to Addendum C. These appear to be the carrier waves for the rest of the page was blank except for a single handwritten note in the margin. I can hear them now. They're beautiful. Petrov was the 23rd person to disappear in connection with the case. By the time his disappearance was noted, 7 more people had gone missing. The investigation was officially closed 2 months later, classified as unsolved with potential psychological contagion factors. The warehouse was demolished, the site paved over and converted into a parking lot. But late at night, when the city grows quiet, people sometimes report hearing strange sounds coming from that empty lot, a complex humming that seems to resonate with something deep inside the human brain. Those who listen too long develop unusual sleeping patterns, then begin to withdraw from social contact. Some claim to see figures walking through solid objects, their bodies distorted in impossible ways, visible only from the corner of the eye. Others report electronics activating without power sources, playing back voices that speak in harmonic layers. And if you press your ear against the pavement of that parking lot on a perfectly still night, you might hear it too, the sound of reality being retuned, frequency by frequency. The whispers between heartbeats, growing louder. Can you hear us now? Do you believe that some places remember the things that happened in them? The question hung in the air as I adjusted my backpack. My name is Daniel, and until that Friday evening, I never thought much about the forest trails surrounding our small town of Pinewood. I was 32, a high school literature teacher with a penchant for solitude after my divorce last year. The hiking trip wasn't my idea. It was Marcus who insisted I needed to reconnect with people. Marcus, my childhood friend, now a successful architect with an infectious enthusiasm for outdoor adventures. We'll take the night trail, Marcus had explained earlier that day, his eyes gleaming with excitement. The northern path through Blackwood Forest. It's perfect for stargazing. There were 5 of us gathered at the trailhead as dusk settled, Marcus and his girlfriend Elena, a biologist with quiet intensity behind her glasses, Tom, a local paramedic with a nervous laugh, Lily, a photographer who'd recently moved to town, and me, the reluctant participant. As we prepared our gear, I noticed something odd, a faint, sweet smell like overripe fruit. Nobody else seemed to notice it. I shrugged it off, but something about that scent made my skin prickle. Daniel, you okay? Lily asked, her camera already out, capturing the fading sunset. Yeah, do you smell that? She shook her head, adjusting her red beanie. Just pine and dirt. The usual forest stuff. We started down the trail, headlamps creating islands of light in the growing darkness. The forest was densely packed with towering pines and ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy that obscured most of the sky. Occasionally, gaps would appear, revealing pinpricks of starlight against velvet black. I trailed behind the group, listening to their excited chatter about constellations and local legends. That's when I first noticed the sound, a soft rustling, just off sync with our footsteps. I turned, sweeping my light across the underbrush, but saw nothing. "Guys, did you hear that?" I called ahead. Tom glanced back. "Probably just a raccoon or something. This forest is full of wildlife." But the rustling continued, sometimes falling silent when we stopped, sometimes continuing when we were perfectly still. The sweet smell grew stronger too, now with an undercurrent of something else, something musty and old. An hour into our hike, we reached Highland Clearing, a small meadow where Marcus suggested we take our first break. As everyone settled on fallen logs, sharing thermoses of coffee and snacks, I wandered to the edge of the clearing, drawn by a flicker of movement just beyond my peripheral vision. My headlamp illuminated a narrow deer path leading deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to lean inward there, creating a tunnel of darkness. As I stared, I could have sworn I saw something move, not animal-like, but deliberate, like fingers curling an invitation. "Daniel!" Marcus called from behind me. "We're heading out. You coming?" I turned back to the group, noticing how the clearing had changed in the minutes I'd been staring into the woods. The air felt heavier, colder. The stars that had been visible earlier were now completely obscured by clouds that hadn't been there before. "Did anyone check the weather forecast?" Elena asked, zipping up her jacket. It wasn't supposed to rain tonight. As if responding to her words, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The wind picked up, carrying that strange sweet musty scent even stronger now. "We should stick to the main trail," Marcus decided, consulting his GPS. "If we keep up the pace, we'll reach the cabin in about 2 hours. The cabin, an old ranger station that Marcus had reserved for our overnight stay, suddenly seemed impossibly far away. As we resumed our hike, the trail began to change subtly. What had been well-marked became overgrown in places, forcing us to double-check the map frequently. The rustling sound returned, but now it was all around us, not just behind, but to the sides, sometimes even ahead. Our headlamps seemed dimmer too, the beams not reaching as far as they should. "Is anyone else's light getting weaker?" Lily asked, tapping her headlamp nervously. "Probably just the batteries," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. I found myself walking closer to the group now, no longer trailing behind. Every few minutes, I glanced back, unable to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following us. "Look," Elena whispered suddenly, pointing to our right. Through a gap in the trees, we could see what appeared to be distant lights, warm, flickering, like candles in windows. "That's weird," Marcus frowned, checking his map again. "There shouldn't be any structures in that direction. We're miles from any road or settlement." "Maybe other hikers?" Tom suggested. But those lights didn't move like flashlights or headlamps. They remained steady, inviting. "Let's stick to our path," Marcus decided after a moment's hesitation. As we continued, I noticed something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls. Just our footsteps and increasingly labored breathing as the trail began to slope upward. That's when I saw it, a flash of white between the trees, moving parallel to our path. Too tall to be a deer, too fluid to be a hiker. "Did anyone see that?" I whispered, not wanting to break the silence completely. Lily had stopped a few paces ahead, her camera raised. "I think so. Over there?" We all turned our lights in the direction she pointed, illuminating nothing but trees and undergrowth. But as our lights swept away, I caught it again from the corner of my eye, a pale figure, just at the edge of visibility, keeping pace with us. "I don't like this," Elena murmured, pressing closer to Marcus. "This trail feels wrong." Marcus checked his GPS again, brow furrowed. "That's strange. According to this, we're nowhere. It's not picking up our location anymore." A twig snapped loudly to our left, causing all of us to jump. Our lights converged on the spot, revealing nothing but shadows. "Just the wind," Tom said weakly. But there was no wind anymore. The forest had become preternaturally still, as if holding its breath. Then came the whispers, so faint at first that I thought I was imagining them. Indistinct voices, seemingly coming from all directions at once, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The looks on their faces told me they did. 5 headlamps swept the darkness in panicked arcs, revealing nothing but trees that somehow seemed to have moved closer together. "We need to keep moving," Marcus urged, his usual confidence wavering. "The cabin can't be far now." But as we resumed walking, I couldn't shake the certainty that the trail we were following was no longer the same one we had started on. The terrain felt unfamiliar, the trees more ancient and twisted. And always, just beyond the reach of our lights, something pale moved with us, keeping pace, watching. The sweet musty smell had become overwhelming now, thick enough to taste. And underneath it all was that persistent rustling sound, like someone dragging something heavy through dead leaves. Is this still the right way?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. None of us had an answer. The familiar landmarks Marcus had mentioned were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the forest around us seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking directly at it. I kept thinking, this is just my imagination. My mind playing tricks in the dark. But I couldn't convince myself. Something was wrong with this forest, with this night. As we crested a small rise, all 5 of our headlamps suddenly flickered and went out simultaneously, plunging us into absolute darkness. In the split second before panic set in, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck, like fingers, but too long, too cold to be human. And then I heard it clearly, a voice right beside my ear, whispering words I couldn't quite understand, but somehow I knew were meant for me alone. "Did anyone bring spare batteries?" Marcus's voice cut through the darkness, strained but attempting normalcy. We fumbled with our packs, the darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hands. My phone flashlight provided minimal relief, a weak circle of light that seemed to be swallowed by the unnatural darkness surrounding us. "This isn't right," Elena whispered. "All 5 headlamps failing at once?" I tried to focus on her voice, but the whisper I'd heard moments before lingered in my ears, words in no language I recognized, yet somehow carrying meaning you've been expected. "Everyone stay together," Marcus commanded, his phone light joining mine. "Form a circle, backs to each other." As we arranged ourselves, our pathetic phone lights barely illuminating a few feet around us, I realized the forest had changed again. The trees seemed closer, their bark glistening with something that looked like dew but couldn't be. It was too thick, too viscous. "Is that moving?" Lily whispered, pointing her light at one of the trees. The surface of the bark rippled slightly, like skin over muscle. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. "We need to get to the cabin," Tom said, his paramedic's training evident in his control voice. "Marcus, which direction?" Marcus consulted his unresponsive GPS again, then looked at the sky. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal a few stars. "That way," he pointed, though he sounded far from certain. "If we keep the North Star to our left, we should eventually hit the main trail again." We moved forward as a tight group, our phone lights creating a small bubble of visibility. The sweet musty smell had intensified, now accompanied by a metallic undertone that reminded me of old pennies. That's when we heard it, a clear, high-pitched laugh that echoed through the trees. Not menacing, but not quite right either. Too perfect, like something mimicking human joy without understanding it. "Hello?" Tom called out. "Is someone there?" "Don't," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't draw attention." But it was too late. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like running footsteps circling our position. "It's just other hikers," Marcus insisted, though his voice quavered. "Playing a stupid prank." Elena suddenly gasped, pointing beyond our light circle. "There! I saw someone." We all turned, light sweeping the darkness. For a split second, our beams caught something, a figure standing between two distant trees. Tall, impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. Before any of us could process what we were seeing, it stepped backward into the darkness, moving with a fluidity that made my stomach clench. "Did you see that?" Lily whispered, her camera forgotten at her side. "Its face." "I didn't see a face," Tom muttered. "Exactly," Lily replied, her voice barely audible. The forest fell silent again, but now the silence felt anticipatory, as if something was waiting just beyond our lights, watching our every move. We pressed onward, following Marcus's increasingly uncertain directions. The terrain became rougher, the trail all but disappeared. Roots seemed to rise from the ground as we approached, creating obstacles that hadn't been there moments before. Tom stumbled over one such root, his phone flying from his hand and disappearing into the underbrush. As he bent to search for it, cursing under his breath, I noticed something strange about the ground around us, small, pale mushrooms growing in a perfect circle, their caps glistening with the same viscous substance we'd seen on the trees. "Don't touch those," Elena warned, noticing them too. Some forest mushrooms are toxic even to touch. But there was something unnatural about their arrangement, about the way they seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light. "Guys," Lily's voice came from a few feet ahead. "I think I see something." Through a narrow gap in the trees, a faint light glowed, steady, warm, yellow. It looked like a window, or perhaps a lantern. "The cabin?" Tom asked hopefully. Marcus shook his head. "We can't have reached it yet. And it's in the wrong direction." "Maybe it's other hikers," Elena suggested. "People who could help us." We stood, indecisive, staring at that distant light. It seemed to beckon, promising warmth and safety. But something about it felt wrong, too convenient, too perfect. "I say we check it out," Tom decided after a moment. "Worst case, it's nothing and we keep going." "We should stick to our original path," I countered, unable to explain the dread pooling in my stomach at the thought of approaching that light. Our group, once united, now stood divided on what to do next. "Look," Marcus said finally, "we need to make a decision. It's getting colder, and our phone batteries won't last all night." As if to emphasize his point, my phone light flickered ominously. "What if we split up?" Lily suggested reluctantly. Some check out the light, the rest try to find the main trail again. We stay in phone contact. The words had barely left her mouth when we heard it again, that perfect, empty laugh, now seeming to come from the direction of the light. That settles it, I said firmly. We stay together and avoid whatever that is. But Tom was already moving toward the light, as if drawn by something stronger than reason. It could be help, he called back. I'm just going to look. Tom, wait! Marcus shouted, but Tom was already pushing through the underbrush toward the glow. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. We can't let him go alone. The group's cohesion fractured in that moment of indecision. Marcus and Elena hurried after Tom, while Lily hesitated, looking between them and me. Daniel, what do we do? She asked, her voice small in the vastness of the dark forest. I stood frozen, torn between following my friends and the overwhelming certainty that the light represented something dangerous. We need to find the main trail, I said finally. If we can get back to the marked path, we can find our way out of here. Lily nodded, stepping closer to me as our remaining friends' lights grew more distant, moving toward that beckoning glow. Marcus. I called one last time. Be careful. Meet back here if anything seems wrong. His answering shout was faint, already partially absorbed by the dense forest. 1 hour. We'll be back in 1 hour. And then they were gone, leaving Lily and me alone with our weakening phone lights and the oppressive silence of the forest. We should mark this spot, Lily suggested, practical despite her fear. She took out a bright orange bandana from her pack and tied it to a low-hanging branch. So we can find it again. We oriented ourselves using the few visible stars and began walking in what we hoped was the direction of the main trail. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching like gnarled fingers, roots rising to trip our feet. Do you think they'll be okay? Lily asked after several minutes of tense silence. I wanted to reassure her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, let's focus on finding the trail. One problem at a time. My phone light was growing noticeably dimmer now, the battery draining at an impossible rate. Lily's wasn't much better. The darkness beyond our feeble lights seemed alive, shifting and moving when we weren't looking directly at it. The rustling sound returned, but now it had a pattern to it, almost like footsteps, but too irregular, too numerous. As if many things were moving around us, just beyond the reach of our lights. Talk to me, Lily said suddenly, her voice tight with fear. About anything. I can't stand this silence. So I talked about my classes, my students, books I'd read recently, anything to fill the oppressive silence around us. But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was listening, learning, gathering information. We'd been walking for what felt like 20 minutes when Lily grabbed my arm. Daniel, she whispered, look at that tree. I followed her gaze to a massive oak a few yards ahead. At first, I saw nothing unusual, but as I stared, I realized there was a small hollow in its trunk, perfectly round, like an eye socket. And within that hollow, something gleamed wetly, catching the light of our phones. Is that? Lily couldn't finish the question. It was moving, whatever it was, rotating slowly to track our movement. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to approach despite every instinct screaming to run. As we drew closer, the hollow came fully into view. It wasn't an eye, not exactly. Instead, it was a small, perfectly circular opening filled with dozens of tiny, thread-like filaments, all pulsing and writhing independently. They glistened with the same viscous substance we'd seen elsewhere, catching our light and reflecting it back in prismatic bursts. "It's just fungus," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Lily. "Some kind of weird forest growth." But as we watched, the filaments oriented toward us like miniature antennae sensing our presence. The sweet musty smell was overwhelming here, emanating from the hollow. "Let's go," Lily whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Please, let's just go." We backed away slowly, unable to tear our eyes from the pulsing hollow. Once we put several yards between us and the tree, we turned and walked faster, no longer concerned with finding the trail so much as putting distance between ourselves and whatever we'd just seen. Our lights caught more of those pale mushrooms now, growing in increasing numbers. They formed patterns on the forest floor, spirals, concentric circles, lines pointing in a specific direction. Some were small, barely visible amidst the leaf litter. Others were larger, their caps as big as dinner plates, pulsing with that same inner light. "Daniel," Lily's voice shook as she pointed ahead. "That's the same orange bandana." I followed her gaze, disbelieving. But there it was, Lily's bright orange bandana tied to a branch exactly as she'd left it. "That's impossible," I muttered. "We've been walking in a straight line." Had we? I suddenly wasn't sure. The forest had a way of disorienting, of making you doubt your own perceptions. "We've been walking in circles," Lily realized, panic rising in her voice. "But how?" "We kept the stars to our right the whole time." I looked up, seeking those navigational points, but the sky had clouded over again. No stars. No moon. Just oppressive darkness above and around us. My phone light flickered again, weaker now. 10% battery remaining. Lily's wasn't much better. "What about the others?" she asked, checking her phone for service. "No signal." "I can't call Marcus." Had it been an hour already? I checked my watch, but the display was blank, dead. Another impossibility. "Let's try a different direction," I suggested, fighting to keep my voice steady. "If we keep ending up here, let's intentionally go another way." We chose a direction perpendicular to our previous attempt and started walking again. This time, I counted steps under my breath, trying to maintain our course through sheer force of will. The rustling sound grew louder, more deliberate. And now there were other sounds too, soft clicks, like teeth chattering, and occasionally that same perfect, hollow laugh, always just at the edge of hearing. "Daniel," Lily whispered after we'd been walking for a few minutes. "I think something's following us." I'd felt it too, a presence just behind us, matching our pace, stopping when we stopped. I could feel its attention like a physical weight on my back. "Don't look back," I warned, remembering every folktale warning I ever read. "Just keep walking." But the presence grew closer, its footsteps, if they were footsteps, no longer trying to disguise themselves. There was a scraping quality to them now, like something being dragged. Despite my own warning, I couldn't resist any longer. I turned, sweeping my dying phone light behind us. For a split second, I saw it, a figure standing barely 10 feet away. Tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places. It wore what looked like tattered clothes, hanging from its frame like moss. But its face... I caught only a glimpse, but that glimpse was enough to send ice through my veins. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull-like shape, interrupted by a single vertical slit where a mouth should be. That slit widened as my light hit it, revealing rows of needle-like teeth and a darkness beyond that seemed to swallow light. I froze, unable to look away, unable to process what I was seeing. The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle, studying me with the same curiosity I might study an insect. Then Lily screamed, snapping me back to reality. I grabbed her hand and we ran, crashing through underbrush, no longer caring about direction or trail, driven only by the primal need to escape. Behind us, something followed, faster than us, but seemingly in no hurry, confident in its pursuit. The forest itself seemed to aid it, branches reaching to slow us, roots rising to trip us. The mushrooms grew thicker here, their glow illuminating our desperate flight with an eerie, pulsating light. There, Lily gasped, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could see the warm yellow glow we'd spotted earlier. Closer now, more defined. It looked like windows, rectangular panels of light in the darkness. No, I panted, still pulling her along. We can't go there. We don't have a choice. Lily cried, her voice breaking with fear. It's coming. I risked another glance back. The creature was still following, moving with that same unhurried confidence. But now I could see others too, similar shapes moving through the trees, converging on our position from different directions. The yellow light ahead seemed to brighten, as if beckoning us. Despite my misgivings, I realized Lily was right. We had nowhere else to go. As we burst through the final line of trees, the sight before us made us skid to a halt. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't even a building in any conventional sense. Rising from the forest floor was a structure that defied rationality, a twisted amalgamation of wood, stone, and what looked disturbingly like bone. Its proportions were wrong, its angles impossible. Windows glowed with that yellow light, but they weren't rectangular as they had appeared from a distance. Instead, they were irregular openings, their edges pulsing and shifting like living tissue. A door stood open at the front, an arch of intertwined branches and what looked like rib cages, revealing warm light beyond. We can't go in there, I whispered, even as the sounds of pursuit grew closer behind us. Lily's grip on my hand tightened. What choice do we have? As if in answer, a high, perfect laugh echoed from within the structure. The same laugh we'd been hearing in the forest. But now it was joined by other sounds, voices speaking in that same unrecognizable language I'd heard whispered in my ear. And then, cutting through those alien sounds, came something that froze my blood, Marcus's voice, calling out in pain. Help! Someone, please! Lily jerked forward instinctively, but I held her back. It might not be him, I warned. It might be something else. But what if it is? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. What if they're in there, needing our help? I had no answer. Behind us, the creatures were emerging from the trees, their pale, featureless faces catching the yellow light from the structure. Before us, the impossible house waited, its open door an invitation or a trap, or both. As my phone light finally died, plunging us into the yellow-tinged darkness, I felt something fundamental shifting, not just around us, but within me. The world I'd known, with its fixed rules and rational explanations, seemed very far away now. We have to decide, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the approaching footsteps and the strange sounds emanating from the structure. The vertical slits on the creatures' faces widened in anticipation as they closed in, and from within the impossible house, Marcus screamed again. We go in, I decided, the words leaving my mouth before my brain could fully process them. At least we can barricade ourselves inside. We ran toward the grotesque structure, feeling the creatures closing in behind us. The doorway pulsed as we approached, widening slightly as if inhaling. Up close, I could see that what I thought were intertwined branches were actually countless thin, woody tendrils writhing slowly like underwater plants. "Don't touch the sides," I warned Lily as we rushed through. Once inside, we spun around, expecting to see the creatures following, but they had stopped at the tree line, their blank faces turned toward us, motionless. The doorway remained open, unblocked. "Why aren't they coming in?" Lily whispered. I had no answer, but the implication sent a chill through me. If these creatures, whatever they were, feared entering this place, what did that say about where we now stood? The interior of the structure defied architectural logic. We stood in what appeared to be a grand entrance hall, but its dimensions shifted subtly when not observed directly. The ceiling rose at least 20 feet, supported by columns that resembled massive tree trunks, but with bark that rippled occasionally like skin over muscle. The walls were covered in what looked like intricate wooden panels, carved with scenes that seemed to move in peripheral vision, figures dancing or running or falling. The floor beneath our feet was smooth wood, segmented in concentric circles that spiraled toward the center of the room. Most disturbing was the light source, not electric, not fire, but what appeared to be large, translucent sacks hanging from the ceiling, glowing with that warm yellow light. They pulsed gently, like beating hearts. "Daniel, look," Lily pointed to the floor. Footprints, human footprints, led from the entrance deeper into the structure. 3 distinct sets. "Marcus, Elena, and Tom," I whispered. "Hello?" Lily called, her voice echoing strangely, as if the room were both larger and smaller than it appeared. "Marcus? Elena? Tom?" No response came, but from somewhere deeper in the structure, we heard that perfect laugh again, followed by what sounded like whispered conversation. "We need to find them," Lily said, moving toward one of 3 doorways leading from the hall. I caught her arm. "Wait. We need to be careful. This place, it's not right." "None of this is right," she replied, her voice steady despite her evident fear. "But our friends are in here somewhere." She was right. As terrifying as this structure was, we couldn't leave without at least trying to find the others. "Let's stay together," I insisted. "No matter what." We chose the doorway with the clearest footprints leading to it. It opened into a long corridor that seemed to curve subtly to the left. The walls here were lined with what appeared to be photographs or portraits, though they were difficult to make out in the dim light provided by more of those pulsing sacks. As we moved closer to examine them, I recoiled in horror. They weren't photographs or paintings, but rather shallow alcoves containing faces. Human faces, pressed against some transparent membrane, their features distorted as if viewed through thick glass. Some seemed to be sleeping. Others stared out with wide, terrified eyes. "Are they real?" Lily breathed, unable to look away from one face, a young woman with long dark hair, her mouth open in a silent scream. I forced myself to look more closely. The faces didn't appear to be attached to bodies. They were just faces suspended in the wall itself. And they were all moving slightly, eyelids fluttering, lips twitching. "Don't touch anything," I whispered, pulling Lily away from the wall. The corridor continued, curving more sharply now. The face alcoves became more numerous, crowding the walls on both sides. Looking at them for too long made my vision swim and my stomach clench, so I focused on the floor, following the footprints. They split up, Lily noticed, pointing to where the 3 sets of tracks diverged. 2 pairs continued ahead, while one set, smaller, likely Elena's, branched off through a side passage. We should follow the majority, I decided reluctantly. 2 rather than 1. Lily nodded, though her eyes lingered on Elena's tracks. We continued forward, the corridor narrowing and the ceiling lowering until we were walking hunched over, the face-filled walls uncomfortably close on either side. The passage eventually opened into a circular room with a high, domed ceiling. Unlike the entrance hall, this space had a clear purpose. It appeared to be some sort of dining room. A long table dominated the center, carved from what looked like a single massive piece of wood. But like everything in this place, it wasn't quite right. The surface rippled occasionally, and the edges weren't straight, but rather organic, flowing lines. Around the table stood chairs, 12 of them, each one a twisted framework of branches and bones that formed horrifically anatomical shapes, as if human skeletons had been woven into the wood itself. "Marcus? Tom?" Lily called softly. Her voice echoed around the dome, returning distorted and multiplied, as if many voices were answering her. 2 of the chairs were pulled out from the table. On the wooden surface before them lay 2 backpacks, Marcus's red one and Tom's black one. "They were here," I said, approaching cautiously. The table was set for a meal, with what appeared to be plates and goblets carved from the same wood as the table. The plates contained what looked like food, mushrooms, berries, and something that resembled meat but was too pale, too iridescent to be natural. "They wouldn't have eaten anything, would they?" Lily asked, horror in her voice. I shook my head, but without conviction. They would know better. But as I looked more closely at one of the plates, I saw bite marks in what appeared to be a piece of bread. Beside it, Tom's water bottle lay on its side, empty. A sound from an adjoining doorway made us both spin around. It was that laugh again, but different now, deeper, overlaid with what sounded horribly like Tom's nervous chuckle. "Tom?" Lily called, moving toward the sound. "Is that you?" "Lily, wait," I cautioned, but she was already crossing to the doorway. It led to another corridor, this one lit not by the pulsing sacs, but by what appeared to be bioluminescent fungi growing along the walls and ceiling. They cast a pale blue light that made Lily's skin look corpse-like as she peered into the passage. "There's someone there," she whispered. "At the end of the hallway." I moved beside her, squinting into the blue-tinged darkness. She was right. A figure stood at the far end, silhouetted against another light source beyond. It had the general shape of a person, but its proportions seemed off, too tall, too thin. "Tom?" I called, my voice catching. "Marcus?" The figure turned, and even from this distance, I could see that its movements were wrong, jerky and fluid at the same time, as if it were a puppet controlled by inexperienced hands. "Daniel?" The voice was Tom's, but distorted, as if he were speaking underwater. "Lily? Is that you guys?" Lily started forward, but I grabbed her arm, holding her back. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "But it's Tom," she insisted, trying to pull away. "No," I said firmly. "I don't think it is. Not anymore." The figure took a step toward us, and in the blue fungal light, I caught a glimpse of its face. It had Tom's general features, but they were wrong. The eyes were too large, too round, and they reflected the light like an animal's. The mouth moved out of sync with the words, as if someone were dubbing over his speech. "Come join us," Not Tom said, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. "Everyone's here. Everyone's happy." Behind him, more figures appeared, one roughly Marcus's height and build, another smaller, likely meant to be Elena. They moved with the same wrong motions, their faces obscured in shadow. We found the truth, Daniel, not Marcus called, his voice carrying that same underwater quality. The forest showed us. You need to see too. I began backing away, pulling Lily with me. We need to go, I whispered. Now. But what if it's really them? Lily protested, though her voice wavered with doubt. Daniel, Elena called, stepping forward. Her movement was the most disturbing of all. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground, as if she were being suspended by invisible strings. You've always wanted to understand, haven't you? To see beyond the ordinary? This is your chance. The three figures began moving toward us, their gait becoming increasingly unnatural with each step. Not Tom's arms swung too far, like pendulums. Not Marcus's head rotated too far when he turned to look at Elena. And Elena, her feet were now visibly hovering an inch above the floor. Run, I urged Lily, turning her toward the dining room. Don't look back. We fled, hearing those wrong footsteps accelerating behind us. Back through the dining room, where the food on the plates was now visibly moving, writhing like living tissue. Into the corridor with the face alcoves, which were all now awake, all eyes following our passage. Some opened their mouths, emitting soft moans that echoed behind us. The faces. They're all watching us now. Every single one, Lily gasped as we ran. The face alcoves began to bulge outward, the transparent membranes containing them stretching as if the faces were trying to push through. One ruptured with a wet tearing sound, a gelatinous substance spilling onto the floor as the face, now revealed to be attached to a long, eel-like body, flopped onto the ground. Don't look, I warned, pulling Lily faster as more membranes began to tear. We reached the entrance hall, but found it transformed. The concentric circles on the floor were now spiraling downward, forming a depression in the center of the room. The columns pulsed visibly, their bark-like coverings splitting in places to reveal glistening, reddish tissue beneath. The light sacs overhead had grown larger, their pulsing more rapid, their colors shifting from yellow to orange. And the doorway, our exit, was gone. Where it had been, there was only solid wall, covered in the same moving carvings as the rest of the chamber. It's closed us in, Lily whispered, her voice cracking. Daniel, it's closed us in. Behind us, the not quite right versions of our friends emerged from the corridor, moving with that unsettling, puppet-like gait. They were joined by other figures now, shadowy shapes that seemed to peel themselves from the walls, solidifying as they approached. We're here to help you understand, Not Tom said, his two wide eyes reflecting the orange light. You've been chosen, Not Marcus added, his head rotating further than humanly possible to look at me. Just like we were. The forest needs new faces, Not Elena whispered, her feet still hovering above the floor. New voices. New stories. Stay back. I shouted, backing toward the center of the room, still holding Lily's hand. The figures continued their approach, joined now by the eel-like creatures that had emerged from the face alcoves. They slithered across the floor, their human faces contorted in expressions of pain or ecstasy. It was impossible to tell which. Daniel, Lily tugged at my sleeve, pointing to the floor beneath us. The spiral depression had deepened further, revealing what appeared to be a staircase winding downward. From that darkness below, the sweet musty smell emerged stronger than ever, along with sounds, whispers, laughter, and something else. Something like music, but played on instruments no human hands had crafted. We have to go down, Lily said, her voice suddenly calm. It's the only way out. How do you know that? I asked, staring at her. For a moment, Something flickered across her face, an expression too fluid, too perfect. Then it was gone, and she was just Lily again, scared and desperate. "I don't," she admitted. "But we can't stay here." She was right about that. The figures were closing in from all sides now, their movements becoming more erratic, more eager. The walls themselves seemed to be contracting, the room growing smaller. "Down it is," I agreed, stepping onto the first spiral stair. The steps were uncomfortably soft underfoot, like walking on flesh rather than wood or stone. They seemed to adjust to our weight, molding to our feet as we descended. The orange light from above faded quickly, replaced by a pale phosphorescence emanating from the walls of the stairwell. As we wound deeper into the earth, the sounds grew clearer, music played on bone and sinew, voices singing in that unrecognizable language, laughter that rose and fell in impossible cadences. "Where do you think this leads?" Lily whispered after we descended for what felt like minutes. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think it leads out." The staircase finally ended in a small antechamber. 3 archways led from it, each one a grotesque parody of classical architecture, with columns made of stacked vertebrae and lintels of fused rib cages. From each opening came different sounds, different smells, different qualities of light. From the left archway came sounds of water, rushing, gurgling, dripping, and the smell of damp earth and decay. A cold, blue-green light seeped from it, casting long shadows. The center archway emitted that strange music most clearly, along with a warm, pulsing orange light similar to what we'd seen in the entrance hall. The sweet musty smell was strongest here, but now with an undertone of spices and cooking meat. From the right archway came sounds of wind and what might have been distant voices calling. The light was white and harsh, the smell like ozone after a lightning strike. "Which way?" Lily asked, her voice small in the vastness of her predicament. Before I could answer, a sound from behind made us both turn. Footsteps on the stairs, many footsteps, descending rapidly. "We have to choose," I said urgently. Lily stared at the 3 options, then pointed to the right archway. "That one feels, least wrong." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We rushed through the right archway into a long, straight corridor. Unlike the organic architecture of the rest of the structure, this passage was almost clinical in its precision, smooth white walls, floor, and ceiling, all glowing with that harsh white light. The wind we'd heard was real, rushing past us from behind, carrying whispered words I couldn't quite make out. The corridor seemed to extend forever, with no doors or windows breaking its perfect symmetry. "Are those people ahead?" Lily asked, squinting into the distance. I followed her gaze. Far down the corridor, indistinct figures moved, their shapes blurred by distance and the strange quality of the light. "I think so," I replied, hope rising despite my better judgment. Maybe there's a way out after all. We quickened our pace, the figures gradually becoming clearer as we approached. There were 4 of them, standing in a loose circle, apparently deep in conversation. "Hello?" I called when we were perhaps 50 yards away. The figures turned as one, and I felt my hope curdle into dread. They looked human at first glance, 2 men and 2 women in hiking clothes similar to our own. But as we drew closer, subtle wrongness became apparent. Their faces were too symmetrical, their movements too smooth. And their eyes, they had no whites, no irises, just uniform blackness from edge to edge. "More arrivals," one of the men said, his voice oddly resonant, as if speaking in a cathedral. "The forest is generous tonight," one of the women added, her smile revealing teeth that were perfectly white and uniform, like porcelain. They began walking toward us with that same unsettling fluidity we'd seen in the not-quite versions of our friends. "Back," I muttered to Lily, pulling her behind me as we retreated. "We need to go back." But the sound of footsteps from the direction we'd come told us that option was closed. The pursuers from above had reached the corridor. "What do we do?" Lily whispered, her grip on my hand painfully tight. I looked around desperately. The corridor's perfect symmetry was broken only by what appeared to be seams in the walls, spaced at regular intervals. They might have been decorative, or they might have been doors, I realized, rushing to the nearest seam and running my fingers along it. Yes, a thin crack where a panel met the wall. No handle, no visible mechanism. "Help me," I urged Lily. "There has to be a way to open it." We pressed against the panel, searching for any depression or protrusion that might serve as a handle or button. The perfect black-eyed hikers were getting closer, their faces now set in expressions of hunger rather than welcome. "Daniel," Lily whispered, pressing herself against the wall beside the seam. "I think I feel something. An indentation, like..." The panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing darkness beyond. Without hesitation, I pulled Lily through, and the panel slid closed behind us with the same soft sound. We found ourselves in absolute darkness, the white light of the corridor completely cut off. The air was different here, cooler, damper, with a mineral smell like wet stone. "Do you still have your phone?" Lily whispered. "Even with no battery, the screen might give us some light." I fumbled in my pocket, finding my dead phone. Pressing the power button repeatedly produced a weak flash as the screen tried and failed to boot. But that momentary illumination was enough to reveal where we stood, a natural cave, its walls glistening with moisture, a narrow passage leading deeper into darkness. I think we might be back in the real world," I said cautiously. "Or at least, closer to it." "How do you know?" Lily asked, her voice wavering between hope and skepticism. "The air," I replied. "It smells normal. Like a cave should smell. Not like in there." We stood silent for a moment, listening. No music, no whispers, no wrong footsteps. Just the soft drip of water and the distant sound of air moving through stone passages. "We should follow the cave," Lily suggested. "If it's natural, it must lead somewhere." Using the weak flashes from my phone screen to guide us, we began moving carefully through the darkness. The passage narrowed in places, widened in others, but always continued deeper. After what felt like hours of slow progress, I noticed something. The darkness ahead seemed less absolute, tinged with a grayish quality that suggested approaching dawn. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Lily. "I think there's light ahead." We quickened our pace, the gray light growing stronger. The cave passage began sloping upward, the air becoming fresher, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Finally, we emerged onto a hillside just as the first rays of dawn broke over the eastern horizon. Below us stretched blackwood forest, peaceful and ordinary in the early morning light. In the distance, I could make out what appeared to be a road, and beyond that, the faint outline of buildings, civilization. "We made it," Lily breathed, tears streaming down her face. We actually made it out. I wanted to share her relief, but something held me back, a nagging sense that our escape had been too easy, too convenient. The creatures in the forest, the impossible structure, the not-quite versions of our friends, would they simply let us go? What about the others? I asked quietly. Marcus, Elena, Tom? Lily's expression fell. We have to get help. Rangers, police, someone. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. What would we tell them? Who would believe us? As if reading my thoughts, Lily said, they'll think we're crazy. Or that we got lost and imagined things because of panic and exhaustion. Maybe that's what happened, I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. You know it wasn't, Lily replied, her eyes suddenly hard. You saw what I saw. You heard what I heard. I couldn't argue with that. Whatever had happened in that forest, in that impossible structure, it had been real, or at least, as real as anything could be in a world where such things existed. We began making our way down the hillside toward the distant road, the morning sun warming our backs. Neither of us spoke much, each lost in private thoughts about what we experienced and what it might mean. As we neared the road, Lily suddenly stopped. Daniel, she said, her voice strange. What's that on your hand? I looked down at my right hand, the one that had been clasped with Lily's through most of our ordeal. On my palm was a small mark I'd never seen before, a perfect spiral, like the one on the floor of the entrance hall, etched into my skin as if with acid. I don't know, I said, rubbing at it. The mark didn't hurt, didn't smudge, didn't change. Lily extended her own hand, revealing an identical spiral on her palm. I think, she said slowly, they let us go for a reason. I stared at the marks, a cold certainty settling in my gut. They're not finished with us. No, Lily agreed, her gaze turning back toward the forest we'd just escaped. I don't think they are. As if in confirmation, from the distant trees came a sound carried on the morning breeze, that perfect, empty laugh, now seeming to come from many throats at once. And for a moment, just before the sun rose fully above the horizon, I could have sworn I saw figures standing at the forest's edge, tall, thin figures with faces like blank masks, watching us go with the patient certainty of predators who know their prey can never truly escape. 3 days had passed since we stumbled onto that rural highway, dehydrated and disoriented. 3 days of questioning, disbelief, and mounting dread. The local authorities had initially treated our story as a case of hikers lost in the woods, suffering from dehydration and panic. When we insisted about the structure, the creatures, they exchanged those looks I'd come to recognize, the ones that said "Huma the crazy people." And you say 3 of your friends are still missing? Officer Reynolds asked for the 3rd time that morning, his pen hovering over his notepad. We sat in the small interview room of the Pinewood Police Department, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Yes, I repeated, fighting to keep my voice steady. Marcus Chen, Elena Vasquez, and Thomas Kendrick. We were all hiking together Thursday night. We got separated. Lily and I, we made it out. They didn't. Reynolds nodded, jotting something down. And you're sure they didn't just head back to town without you? No chance they got turned around and went a different way? We saw them, Lily insisted, her knuckles white as she gripped her paper cup of water. In that place. Something happened to them. Something changed them. Reynolds sighed, closing his notebook. We've had search teams combing Blackwood Forest for 3 days. No sign of your friends, no sign of any structure like you've described. Did they check the northern section? I asked. Near Highland Clearing? Mr. Reed, Reynolds said, his patience clearly wearing thin, we've covered the entire area. There is no structure in Blackwood Forest. No cabin, no mansion, nothing that matches your description. I wasn't surprised. Something told me the structure wouldn't be found by daylight, by people who weren't looking for it, or perhaps weren't being looked for by it. What about the marks? Lily asked, extending her palm to show the spiral. I did the same. Reynolds glanced at our hands. Could be anything. Allergic reaction to a plant, maybe. Dr. Mercer at the hospital said they looked like mild chemical burns. Both of us? The exact same mark? I pressed. The officer stood, indicating our interview was over. I understand you're concerned about your friends. We all are. The search will continue, but at this point, we're treating it as a standard missing persons case. As we left the police station, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too normal. The townspeople went about their business, stopping at the post office, chatting outside the coffee shop, walking dogs along the sidewalk. How could everything be so ordinary when the world had fundamentally changed? They won't find them, Lily said quietly as we walked toward my apartment. She'd been staying with me since our return, neither of us wanting to be alone. Not like that. I know, I agreed. But what else can we do? The spiral marks on our palms had neither faded nor changed, remaining as perfect and precise as the moment we discovered them. Sometimes at night, I thought they pulsed faintly in rhythm with my heartbeat, but I couldn't be sure if that was real or my imagination working overtime. My apartment felt like a stranger's home now. The books on my shelves, the coffee mugs in my cabinet, the photographs on my walls, all artifacts from a life that no longer felt like mine. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, sleeping little, eating less. We need to go back, Lily said that night as we sat at my kitchen table, pushing pasta around our plates. I looked up sharply. Back to the forest? Are you insane? Maybe, she admitted, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. But Daniel, we can't just leave them there. What exactly do you think we can do? I asked, pushing my plate away. We barely escaped with our lives. And now you want to go back. Don't you hear it? She whispered, her gaze drifting toward my apartment window. At night, when everything's quiet. That laugh. A chill ran down my spine because yes, I had heard it. In the moments between wakefulness and sleep, that perfect, empty laugh echoed in my ears, followed by whispers in that strange language I shouldn't understand but somehow did. They're not finished with us, Lily continued, unconsciously rubbing the spiral on her palm. The marks prove it. Whatever happened in there, it's not over. All the more reason to stay away, I argued, but without much conviction. I've been dreaming about them, Lily confessed. Marcus, Elena, Tom. They're changing. Every night, they look less like themselves. And they're always asking why we left them behind. I hadn't told Lily about my own dreams, similar nightmares where our friends appeared, their features gradually morphing into something inhuman, their movements becoming more fluid, more wrong. In my dreams, they showed me things, impossible landscapes, creatures that defied description, knowledge that burned in my brain like acid. I've been dreaming too, I admitted. And I've been remembering things that I don't think actually happened. Lily leaned forward, suddenly alert. What kind of things? Childhood memories, but wrong. Like, I remember playing in Blackwood Forest as a kid, finding a circle of those pale mushrooms. Standing in the middle while something watched from the trees. I shook my head. But that never happened. I didn't grow up here. I moved to Pinewood 4 years ago. I have them too, Lily whispered. False memories. Like the structure is trying to give itself a history with us. The thought was deeply unsettling. If whatever dwelled in that forest could reach into our minds, plant false memories, manipulate our dreams, were we ever truly safe? A sudden knock at my apartment door made us both jump. It was nearly 11 at night, too late for casual visitors. "Are you expecting someone?" Lily asked, tension evident in her voice. I shook my head, moving cautiously to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face, Dr. Mercer from the hospital, the physician who had examined us upon our return. "Dr. Mercer?" I said as I opened the door. "Is everything okay?" The doctor looked dreadful, pale, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. He glanced nervously over his shoulder before speaking. "May I come in? I need to talk to you. Both of you." I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved to the living room, declining my offer of coffee or water. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling a manila folder from his bag. "The results of some tests I ran on those marks on your hands." Lily joined us, sitting beside me on the couch as Mercer spread several printouts on the coffee table. "When I first examined you, I assumed these were chemical burns or maybe an allergic reaction," he explained, pointing to microscopic images of the spiral patterns. "But then I noticed something strange in the tissue samples. The affected cells are changing." "Changing how?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "They're restructuring at a molecular level," Mercer said, his voice dropping. "Taking on properties I've never seen before. The spiral isn't just on your skin, it's changing the tissue beneath, creating a new cellular pattern that's spreading. Slowly, but consistently." "Spreading to what?" Lily asked, her face pale. Mercer hesitated. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. But that's not why I'm here." He pulled something else from his bag, a worn, leather-bound journal. "I'm here because of this." He opened the journal to reveal pages of handwritten notes, diagrams, and pressed specimens. Botanical drawings of familiar pale mushrooms. Sketches of thin, featureless figures. Spirals identical to the ones on our palms. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would terrify me. "My grandfather's journal," Mercer explained. He was the town doctor here in the 1960s. He documented similar cases, hikers who went missing in Blackwood Forest, others who returned changed. Always with the same marks. "Why didn't you tell the police?" Lily demanded. Mercer laughed bitterly. "I tried. Years ago, when I first found this, they treated me like I was crazy. The same way they're treating you two now." He turned pages in the journal, stopping at a detailed drawing of what could only be the structure we'd encountered, the impossible architecture, the organic components, the face alcoves along the walls. "My grandfather called it the threshold," Mercer continued. He believed it was a doorway of sorts, between our world and something else. "Something else?" I echoed. "Another dimension. Another reality." He was never quite sure. But he was convinced that whatever exists on the other side has been trying to establish a foothold here for centuries. Through people, Lily whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "People who come back marked." Mercer nodded grimly. "Altered. Changed in ways that aren't immediately obvious." I thought of the not-quite versions of our friends we'd seen in the structure. The way they moved, spoke, thought. Was that the fate that awaited Lily and me? Were we already changing from the inside out? How many others? I asked. How many people have come back marked? Over the years? Dozens. Most leave town eventually. Some deteriorate mentally. Start talking about voices, visions. The rest seem normal, but Mercer trailed off. But what? Lily pressed. They have children, Mercer said quietly. Children who are drawn to the forest. Children who sometimes don't come back. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. Dr. Mercer, why did you really come back to Pinewood? You could practice medicine anywhere. Why return to a small town like this? The doctor's eyes met mine, and in them I saw recognition, the look of someone who understood exactly what I was asking. I was born here, he said simply. My mother went hiking in Blackwood Forest in 1972. She came back with a spiral mark on her palm. I was born 9 months later. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying... I'm saying that whatever exists beyond the threshold has been integrating itself into this town for generations, Mercer interrupted. Through bloodlines. Through subtle changes that accumulate over time. Why are you telling us this? Lily asked, her voice shaking. Mercer closed the journal. Because the marks are spreading faster in you two than in any case my grandfather documented. Because 3 of your friends are still missing. And because I've been monitoring unusual activity in the forest since you returned. What kind of activity? I asked. The mushroom circles are expanding. Wildlife is avoiding the northern section entirely. And people are reporting strange lights at night, sounds that shouldn't exist. The threshold is becoming more active. What can we do? Lily's question hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Mercer looked grim. My grandfather believed there was a way to close the threshold permanently. A ritual of sorts, using symbols that counter the spiral pattern. He opened the journal again, showing us complex geometric designs. But it would require bringing these symbols directly to the threshold itself. Going back, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Yes, Mercer confirmed. And soon. Before the changes progress too far. Before whatever is happening to you two becomes irreversible. After Mercer left, promising to return the next evening with more information and supplies, Lily and I sat in silence, the weight of his revelations pressing down on us like a physical force. We don't have a choice, do we? Lily finally said, staring at the spiral on her palm. We have to go back. No, I agreed, watching the marks seem to pulse in time with my heartbeat. We don't have a choice. That night, I dreamed more vividly than ever. I stood in the entrance hall of the threshold, but now I understood its purpose, a transitional space, neither fully of our world nor the other. The concentric circles on the floor spiraled downward into infinity, into realms human minds weren't meant to comprehend. Marcus, Elena, and Tom stood before me, their transformations further advanced. Their limbs were longer, joints more fluid. Their faces had begun to smooth over, features melting into that familiar blankness. But their eyes were still human, filled with pain and pleading. It chose us, Daniel, not quite Marcus said, his voice carrying that underwater quality. All of us. But you and Lily were meant for something else. We're changing, not quite, Elena added, her feet hovering slightly above the floor. Becoming. But you two are bridges. What does that mean? I asked, though in the dream logic, I already knew. You'll bring more to the forest, not quite, Tom explained, his head tilting at that impossible angle. Your children will be more than human, more than other. Perfect bridges between worlds. I tried to back away, but the floor beneath me shifted, holding me in place. The walls seemed to contract, breathing like a living organism. You can't escape what's beginning, not quite, Marcus said, something like pity in his two large eyes. The threshold has existed for centuries, waiting for the right vessels. Now it has found them. We didn't want this, I insisted. What doesn't matter, not quite, Elena replied, her voice taking on multiple tones simultaneously. The forest chose. The structure prepared. The circle continues. As they spoke, I became aware of something else in the entrance hall with us, something vast and ancient, watching through every surface, listening through the very air. It had no name I could comprehend, no form I could perceive directly. But I sensed its attention, its hunger, its patience. What happens if we try to close the threshold? I asked, already dreading the answer. The three exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. You can't close what has always been open, not quite, Tom said finally. You can only choose which side you stand on when the merging completes. I awoke gasping, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around me. The spiral on my palm glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing with a light that came from within my flesh rather than reflecting from outside. Lily stood in my bedroom doorway, her own mark glowing with the same internal light. I saw them too, she said simply. We need to go back to the forest. Now. Tonight. Mercer said to wait, I reminded her, though I was already getting up, already reaching for clothes. Mercer doesn't understand the timeline, Lily replied, her voice oddly calm. Something's accelerating. I can feel it. Can't you? I could. Something inside me was changing, cells restructuring, thoughts realigning. New memories continued to surface, memories of the forest, of the structure, of things I couldn't possibly have experienced but somehow recalled with perfect clarity. If we wait until morning, Lily continued, it might be too late. As if in confirmation, from somewhere distant yet impossibly close, that perfect, empty laugh echoed through my apartment, not heard with my ears, but felt in my mind. You're right, I agreed, pulling on hiking boots. We go now. The night was clear and cold as we slipped out of my apartment building, the streets of Pinewood deserted at 3 in the morning. We took my car, driving in silence toward the forest that had changed everything. The trailhead parking lot was empty when we arrived, moonlight casting long shadows across the gravel. We hadn't brought much, flashlights, water, Mercer's journal with the counter-spiral symbols. What else could possibly help us against what waited in the forest? As we stepped from the car, the air temperature dropped noticeably. Our breath clouded before us, despite it being a mild spring night. And there was that smell again, sweet and musty, with undertones of decay and something alien. It knows we're here, Lily whispered, her eyes on the dark line of trees ahead. It's waiting for us. I nodded, feeling the same certainty. Let's not keep it waiting, then. We entered Blackwood Forest for the second time, knowing full well we might never leave it again. The forest welcomed us like old friends. The trees seemed to bend slightly inward as we passed, branches reaching down just enough to brush our shoulders. The sweet musty smell intensified with each step, and that familiar rustling sound accompanied our progress, always just behind or beside us, never fully visible. But things were different this time. Instead of fear, I felt a strange familiarity, as if returning to a childhood home. The spiral marks on our palms glowed steadily now, providing enough light that we didn't need our flashlights. Do you hear them? Lily asked softly as we moved deeper along the trail. I did, whispers in that language I shouldn't understand but somehow did. They spoke of patience, of cycles, of hunger and transformation. They spoke of us. They're guiding us, I realized, noticing how the whispers grew louder when we veered slightly off course, quieter when we corrected our path. The trail changed subtly as we walked, becoming less defined in places, more overgrown. The trees grew older, more twisted, their bark glistening with that same viscous substance we'd seen in the structure. Pale mushrooms lined our path, growing in complex patterns that my mind recognized as a form of writing, a set of instructions, or perhaps a welcome. Do you remember what Mercer said? I asked Lily, trying to focus on our purpose here. About the counter-spiral symbols? She nodded, though her eyes seemed distant, drawn to the patterns of fungi on the forest floor. We need to inscribe them at the entrance to the threshold. All 4 cardinal points. And that should close it, I continued, more to remind myself than her. Seal the boundary between our world and whatever's on the other side. Whatever's changing us, Lily added, holding up her glowing palm. The spiral pattern had grown more complex since morning, tiny offshoots branching from the main design like roots or veins. We walked for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time seemed fluid here, stretching and contracting unpredictably. The moonlight filtering through the canopy took on strange colors, blues and purples that shouldn't exist in nature. Finally, we reached a familiar clearing, Highland Clearing, where our ordeal had begun days ago. But it had changed. The ground was covered in those pale mushrooms, arranged in concentric circles that mirrored the floor of the entrance hall. At the center stood a single massive oak tree, its trunk split open to reveal a pulsing, organic doorway that hadn't been there before. The threshold, Lily whispered, her voice filled with recognition. It's showing itself to us. Standing around the perimeter of the clearing were familiar figures, the tall, thin creatures with blank faces that had pursued us through the forest during our first visit. They stood motionless, watching us with an attention I could feel even though they had no visible eyes. They're not stopping us, I noted as we cautiously approached the split oak. They're waiting. They know why we're here, Lily replied. They just don't believe we'll go through with it. As we neared the center of the clearing, 3 figures stepped from the shadows between the watching creatures. My heart contracted painfully as I recognized them. Marcus, Elena, and Tom were what had once been them. Their transformations were nearly complete now. Their bodies had elongated, limbs thin and jointed in too many places. Their skin had taken on the same pale, slightly luminescent quality as the mushrooms. Their faces were smooth expanses of flesh, with only vertical slits where mouths should be. But their eyes remained human, windows to the friends who still existed somewhere inside these changed forms. You came back, not quite, Marcus said, his voice now a chorus of overlapping tones. We had to, I replied, clutching Mercer's journal tighter. You know why. To close the threshold, not quite, Elena said, hovering several inches above the ground. To stop the changing. To save ourselves, Lily added, her voice stronger than I expected. Not quite. Tom tilted his head at that impossible angle. But don't you understand yet? There is no salvation from this. Only acceptance or destruction. What does that mean? I demanded. The 3 exchanged glances, communicating silently in a way I almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. The marks aren't just changing you, not quite, Marcus explained. They're awakening something that was always there. Something planted in this town generations ago. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Dr. Mercer. Is one of us, not quite Elena confirmed. Has always been one of us. The journal is real. His grandfather did document the threshold. But Mercer's purpose was never to help you close it. Then what? Lily asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. To ensure you returned, not quite, Tom said simply. To complete what began when you first entered the forest. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.